It happened last winter. My friend Chris and I were driving from Denver to a small town in Montana to visit his family for Christmas. A straight shot through some of the coldest, most desolate roads in the country. Snow had been falling since we left, light at first, but by the time we hit Wyoming, it turned into a thick, blinding curtain. I should have insisted we stop somewhere, but Chris was determined to keep going. "We'll take Route 89, he said. It's a shortcut." I wished to God we hadn't. Route 89 was a lonely stretch of road. No streetlights, no cars, just miles and miles of snow-covered asphalt cutting through frozen nothingness. Our headlights barely pierced the storm, the snowflakes swirling like ghostly figures in the dark. The GPS had no signal, but according to the map, we had about 40 miles until the next town. Then, out of nowhere, we saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Chris slammed the brakes, and the car skidded on the icy pavement, stopping just feet away. My breath caught in my throat. It was a woman, barefoot, wearing a torn white dress. Her hair was soaked, sticking to her pale face. She didn't look at us. She just stood there, shivering. Chris turned to me. "What the hell?" I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to drive away. But something about her, I couldn't leave her there. I rolled the window down just a crack. "Miss, are you okay?" She didn't answer. Her lips trembled, but not from the cold. Chris reached for the door handle. "No," I whispered. "Don't." But it was too late. He stepped out into the storm, approaching her slowly. "Do you need help?" Still no answer. I couldn't see her face clearly, just the outline of her fragile frame. My stomach churned as Chris took another step. Then she moved, not like a person, more like something being lifted, her body jerking unnaturally. Her head snapped toward him, and that's when I saw her face. Sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, lips curled into something that wasn't a smile. Chris gasped, stumbling backward. "Get in the car?" I shouted. He didn't need to be told twice. He ran, yanking the door shut just as the woman let out a sound, an ear-splitting wail that rattled my bones. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, something wrong. Chris floored it. The car fishtailed, tires struggling for grip, but we sped away. I turned back once. She was still standing there, staring after us, her body rigid in the storm. Neither of us spoke for a long time. "Did you see her face?" Chris finally whispered. I nodded. My hands were shaking. We didn't stop, didn't even slow down. But the road stretched on forever, and no matter how far we drove, the snow only got worse. The clock on the dashboard read 2:37 a.m. I swear it didn't change for hours. The storm swallowed the world outside, and soon I couldn't tell if we were even moving forward anymore. Then the car lurched. A loud thump echoed through the cabin like something had landed on the roof. Chris cursed, gripping the wheel. My heart hammered against my ribs. Another thump, this time from the trunk. I turned slowly, afraid of what I might see. The rear windshield was fogged over, but through the frost, a shape pressed against the glass. A hand, pale, skeletal, dragging slowly across the surface. I screamed. Chris lost control and the car spun, skidding off the road. Snow exploded around us as we slammed to a stop. The engine sputtered and died. Silence. We sat there, frozen, listening to the wind howl outside. Then, tap, tap, tap on my window. I turned my head, every muscle in my body locking up. She was there. Her face inches from mine, the glass the only thing separating us. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then her lips stretched wider, wider, until her jaw unhinged, splitting her face in half. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember how I got the door open, how I stumbled out into the storm. All I remember is running. Chris was right behind me. We ran blindly through the snow, the cold slicing into our skin. Behind us, the car's headlights flickered, then died, swallowed by the night. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, crunching in the snow, keeping pace with us, fast, too fast. I turned my head, and I swear to you, I saw her running beside us. Not through the snow, but above it. Floating. Her face still twisted in that unnatural, gaping grin. Chris screamed. Then he just stopped. I turned, and he was gone. Vanished. The footsteps stopped too. Everything was silent. I don't know how long I stood there, too scared to breathe. The storm swirled around me, and I felt her. I felt her watching. Then I heard Chris's voice. Weak, distant. "Help me," I spun around. Nothing. "Help, please." It came from the trees, just off the road. I should have run. I should have kept going, but I didn't. I stepped forward, and that's when I saw them. The figures, not just the woman. There were more. So many more. Standing in the snow, half hidden by the trees. Their faces were hollow, their eyes black voids, their mouths open in soundless screams. I felt something cold brush my arm. That's when I ran. I don't remember making it to the road. I don't remember how long I ran before I saw headlights cutting through the storm. A truck driver found me, collapsed in the snow. He said I was babbling nonsense, saying Chris's name over and over. They never found him. Just the car, abandoned on Route 89. The driver's side door was open. There were footprints leading away, 2 sets. One was his. The other, bare feet in the snow. I don't take winter road trips anymore. And if you ever find yourself on Route 89 during a snowstorm, if you see a woman standing in the road, for the love of God, don't stop.
Story number 2.
I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I swear this happened. And if it happened to me, it could happen to you. It was last December, a few days before Christmas. I was driving back to Seattle from visiting my parents in Montana. I'd made the trip a dozen times before, always the same route, Interstate 90, straight across Washington. But that night, a storm rolled in and everything changed. The snow started falling heavy around 8 p.m., thick flakes swirling in my headlights. I wasn't too worried at first. I had a full tank, good tires, and enough caffeine in my system to keep me going. But when I saw the flashing road sign just outside Spokane, I-90, closed ahead, detour required, I knew I was screwed. The GPS rerouted me to a smaller highway that cut through the mountains. Highway 42. I'd never heard of it before. I should have turned around. The road was empty. No cars, no streetlights. Just endless snow-covered trees on either side, their branches drooping under the weight of ice. I kept my eyes on the road, my wipers working overtime to keep the windshield clear. My phone had lost service an hour ago, but I figured I only had another 50 miles before I hit the main highway again. Then I saw the sign. Welcome to Ashford, population 211. A town? That didn't make sense. There was nothing on the map about a town out here. But sure enough, up ahead, I saw buildings, dimly lit houses, an old gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign. The place looked frozen in time, like something out of the 1950s. I slowed down, my tires crunching over the packed snow. I hadn't seen another car for miles, but as I rolled into town, I spotted an old truck parked outside the diner. A single light glowed inside. I hadn't eaten since morning, and my nerves were shot. I figured I'd stop, grab some coffee, maybe ask someone about the road conditions ahead. The moment I stepped inside, the place went silent. There were 5 people inside, an old man behind the counter, 2 middle-aged guys in work jackets, and a woman sitting alone at a booth. They all turned to look at me at the same time. I forced a smile. "Hey, road's pretty bad out there." The old man nodded slowly. "Storm's getting worse." His voice was raspy, like he'd smoked a pack a day for 50 years. "Where you headed?" "Seattle," I said. "Took the detour off I-90. Didn't expect to run into a town." One of the workers frowned. "Ain't no town here." I blinked. What?" The woman in the booth spoke up. "Not anymore." The air in the diner felt heavier, colder. I laughed nervously. "Well, I'm here now, so," I gestured toward the coffee pot. "Mind if I grab a cup?" The old man hesitated, then nodded. "On the house." I took a seat at the counter and he poured me a steaming cup. I wrapped my hands around it, grateful for the warmth. "You should go," the woman said suddenly. I looked at her. She was staring at me, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "The storm's bad," I said. "I was just going to rest for a minute." She shook her head. "Not the storm." I glanced at the old man, expecting him to tell her to knock it off, but he just kept his head down, wiping the counter with a rag. The other 2 men got up and left without another word. The bell above the door jingled, and then silence. I took a sip of my coffee, trying to ignore the unease creeping into my gut. "So, what happened here?" The woman licked her lips. "Ashford burned down 30 years ago." I frowned. "But I just drove through it." The old man sighed, rubbing his temples. "It happens sometimes," he muttered. My hands tightened around the coffee cup. "What happens?" The woman swallowed hard. "People getting pulled in." My stomach dropped. Pulled into what? The bell above the door jingled again. I turned, expecting to see another person walk in. There was no one there. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Snow swirled through the open doorway, but I didn't remember seeing it open. The old man set the rag down. "You should go," he said softly. I didn't argue. I stood up, my legs unsteady. "Thanks for the coffee." I turned to the woman. She was still staring at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "They'll try to stop you," she said. "Don't listen. Don't look at them." My throat was dry. "Who?" She opened her mouth to answer. Then the lights went out. The diner plunged into darkness. I heard movement, shuffling feet, the scrape of a chair against the floor. I fumbled for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the blue black, and I swept it around the room. The woman was gone. The old man was gone. The diner was empty. The air was thick with something rotten. My skin prickled, and a deep, bone-chilling fear wrapped around my ribs like a vice. I backed toward the door, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The wind outside howled louder. The snow was falling heavier. I stepped outside and froze. The town was gone. No diner, no gas station, no houses, just endless snow-covered forest, stretching in every direction. My car was still there, parked on the side of an empty road. A road that should have led me to Ashford, but now it was just a forgotten path, cutting through the wilderness. I ran to my car, yanking the door open with numb fingers. I fumbled the keys into the ignition and turned them. The engine roared to life, and I floored it. As I sped down the icy road, my headlights cut through the storm. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep hold of the wheel. Then in the distance, I saw them. Figures standing on the side of the road. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. Their faces pale, eyes hollow. I squeezed the wheel, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Don't look at them," the woman had said. I kept my eyes straight ahead. More figures appeared. Some on the road, some in the trees. Their bodies were thin, almost skeletal. Their faces twisted, mouths open in silent screams. My vision blurred. My heart felt like it would explode. Then, up ahead, I saw the highway. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The figures closed in, their shadows stretching across the snow. I didn't look. I didn't stop. And then, just like that, the road opened up, the highway appearing before me like a lifeline. My car hit pavement, and I nearly sobbed in relief. I didn't slow down, not until I saw the glowing lights of a truck stop up ahead. I pulled in, shaking, breathless. The parking lot was full of cars, trucks, people. The real world. I sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. Finally, I looked at my GPS. There was no Highway 42, no town called Ashford, just miles of untouched forest. I never told anyone what happened. I don't expect anyone to believe me. But if you ever find yourself driving alone in a winter storm, if you ever see a town that shouldn't be there, keep driving, because if you stop, you might never leave.
Story number 3.
I never believed in ghosts, or demons, or anything that couldn't be explained by logic. But after that night, after what I saw on that frozen highway, I don't know what to believe anymore. It was the dead of winter, and I was making the long drive from Chicago to North Dakota for work. I was a truck driver, used to long hours on the road, but this particular route was one I usually avoided in winter. Something about those empty highways, the way the wind howled across the frozen plains, it always unsettled me. But I had a deadline to meet, and I didn't have a choice. I was somewhere along Highway 2 when the snow started falling heavier, thick flakes swirling in my headlights. I kept going, my hands gripping the wheel, watching the empty road stretch ahead into darkness. Then I saw the headlights. At first, I thought it was another truck coming toward me in the opposite lane, but as I got closer, I realized the lights weren't moving. They were just sitting there, barely visible through the storm. A car stopped in the middle of the highway. I slowed down, my tires crunching over the snow-covered asphalt. As I got closer, I saw it was an old sedan, the kind that hadn't been on the road in decades. The driver's side door was open. The engine was still running, exhaust curling into the frozen air, but there was no one inside. I pulled my truck to a stop a few feet away and grabbed my flashlight. Stepping out, the cold hit me like a hammer, the wind biting through my jacket. I approached the car cautiously, scanning the surrounding darkness. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was swallowed by the wind. No answer. I shined my light inside the car. The seats were covered in frost, like the thing had been sitting there for years instead of minutes. The keys were still in the ignition. Something about it felt wrong. I turned back toward my truck, ready to leave, when I saw them. Footprints in the snow, leading away from the car, into the trees on the side of the highway. I swallowed hard, shining my light in that direction. The trees were skeletal, their bare branches rattling in the wind. The footprints went deep into the woods, disappearing into darkness. I should have left. I should have just gotten back in my truck and kept driving. But something made me follow them. I don't know why. Maybe I thought someone was hurt, wandering in the storm. Maybe I just needed to understand why a perfectly good car was abandoned in the middle of nowhere. I stepped off the road, my boots sinking into the snow, and followed the prints. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The wind died down. Even my footsteps felt muffled, like the snow was swallowing the sound. Then I saw it. A figure standing just ahead, barely visible through the trees. I stopped, my breath coming in sharp gasps. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't move. I took another step closer, shining my light. It was a man. He was wearing a thin button-up shirt and slacks, completely inappropriate for the weather. His skin was pale, almost bluish in the cold. "Sir?" I said, my voice trembling. Then he turned. His face, Jesus, his face was wrong. His eyes were completely white, like frozen marbles, and his mouth stretched too wide, lips splitting at the corners. He started walking toward me, not running, not stumbling, just walking. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The closer he got, the colder the air became. My breath came out in thick, heavy clouds, ice forming on my eyelashes. Then he stopped. He lifted a hand and pointed. Not at me, at something behind me. I turned, and my flashlight flickered. For a split second, I saw them. Dozens of figures standing between the trees, their faces twisted and empty, their bodies frozen in the swirling snow. Their mouths moved soundlessly, like they were whispering secrets only the wind could hear. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The man in the button-up was still there, still pointing. I ran. I don't remember making it back to my truck. 1 second I was in the trees, the next I was slamming the door shut, locking it, my breath fogging up the windshield. The abandoned car was still there. The footprints were gone. I didn't wait. I put the truck in gear and sped off, tires slipping on the ice. As I drove, I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the man standing in the middle of the road, watching me. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. I never took Highway 2 again after that. I don't drive in the winter anymore, and sometimes on the coldest nights, when the wind howls just right, I swear I can still hear the whispers.
Story number 4.
I should have never taken that road. I was driving home for Christmas, cutting across the Midwest on my way to visit my sister in Ohio. It was late, past midnight, and I'd been on the road for hours. Snow blanketed everything, turning the world into a quiet, empty void. The highway was dead. No other cars, no streetlights, just the endless stretch of road into the storm. My GPS said to keep going straight for another 50 miles, but then out of nowhere it rerouted. Faster route found, the screen flashed. A smaller road appeared on the map, veering off to the right. It would shave an hour off my drive. I should have ignored it. Instead, I turned. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars, lined with thick, snow-covered trees on either side. My headlights barely pierced the darkness, the snowflakes whipping past like tiny ghosts. After 10 minutes, I realized how isolated I was. No houses, no street signs, no tire tracks, just untouched snow. Then I saw the first set of footprints. They were on the right side of the road, leading into the trees. Fresh. Someone had walked into the forest, barefoot. I kept driving, my fingers tightening around the wheel. Another mile, another set of footprints, identical, leading into the trees, then another and another. My stomach twisted. It didn't make sense. The prints were evenly spaced like someone had walked into the woods over and over again, but there were no tracks leading out. I turned up the heat, trying to shake the growing chill in my bones. The road stretched on endlessly, my headlights illuminating nothing but falling snow and skeletal trees. Then up ahead, something appeared. A figure stood in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. My heart pounded as the figure came into view, tall, thin, wrapped in a long, tattered coat. Their head was lowered, hair hanging over their face. I fumbled for my phone, but of course there was no signal. I honked. No reaction. I rolled the window down just a crack. "Hey, you need help?" Slowly, the figure lifted its head. My breath caught in my throat. Its face was wrong, stretched, pale like wax, the features barely human. Its eyes were sunken pits, its mouth slightly open as if mid-scream. I threw the car in reverse, my hands shaking. The figure took a step forward, then another. Its movements were unnatural, like it was learning how to walk. I floored it. My tires spun for half a second before catching traction, and I tore backward down the road. My headlights flickered, the storm growing thicker, the snow nearly blinding. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I just kept driving, praying the road would lead back to the highway. But it didn't. The trees grew thicker. The snow piled higher. The road twisted in ways that didn't make sense. My GPS glitched, the map spinning, the blue line looping endlessly. And then, impossibly, I saw the same footprints again. Identical. leading into the trees. I pressed the gas pedal harder, my speed climbing. The road was eating itself, pulling me in deeper, and no matter how far I drove, I kept seeing those damn footprints. I turned a corner and nearly screamed. The figure was there again, standing in the middle of the road, only this time it wasn't alone. More figures stood behind it. Dozens. Their bodies were rigid, unmoving. Their faces, if they had faces, were hidden by the dark. I swerved, my car fishtailing, barely missing them. My heart was a drum in my chest, my breathing shallow. I kept driving, forcing myself not to look in the rearview mirror. I don't know how long I drove before I saw the lights. A gas station, flickering, faded, sitting at the edge of the road like a beacon. I pulled in fast, my tires skidding, my headlights washing over the cracked pavement. The place looked abandoned, rusted gas pumps, a dark convenience store, but there was a single car parked outside. An old, rusted sedan. I didn't care. I jumped out, my boots crunching in the snow as I ran for the door. Inside, the air was thick, warm, stale. A single overhead light flickered, casting long shadows across the empty aisles. Behind the counter, an old man sat in a plastic chair, watching a small, black and white TV. He didn't look up when I walked in. "Sir," I panted. I need help. My GPS, it's not working and I think someone's following me." "You took the road," he muttered. I stopped. "What?" He finally looked at me. His eyes were dull, sunken deep into his skull. "You took the road," he repeated, voice barely above a whisper. "You weren't supposed to." The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. My skin prickled. I just followed my GPS," I stammered. "It said this way was faster." "They always say that." I stared at him. My stomach twisted. He leaned forward. "Did you see them?" My blood ran cold. His gaze flickered to the window behind me. I turned, my breath hitching. The figures were standing just beyond the glass. Dozens of them. Silent, motionless, watching. I stumbled back. "What the hell is this?" The old man sighed. "They want you to stay." My pulse roared in my ears. "What does that mean?" "If you don't leave now, you never will." The overhead light flickered again, the shadows shifting. My fingers dug into the counter. "Take the highway," he murmured. "Keep your eyes forward. Don't stop. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." Something in his voice, something broken, something afraid, made my blood turn to ice. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, my legs shaky. The figures outside didn't move as I ran past them, but I swear as I yanked open my car door, I heard whispers, dozens of voices murmuring just beneath the howling wind. I slammed the door shut and floored it. My tires spun for half a second before catching, and then I was flying down the road. The gas station vanished in the rearview mirror, the trees thinned, the storm lightened, and then just like that, I was back on the highway. I didn't question it. I didn't slow down. I just drove, white-knuckled, until the first hints of sunrise bled across the sky. I never found that road again. I tried looking it up later, tried searching for the town, the gas station. None of it existed. And sometimes, when I drive alone at night, my GPS will suddenly reroute. Faster route found. I never take it, because I know what's waiting if I do.
Story number 5.
I've never told anyone this story. I don't think anyone would believe me if I did. But every winter, when the snow starts falling heavy, I remember. And no matter how much time passes, I know what I saw was real. It was late December, a few years ago. I was driving through northern Minnesota, heading to my uncle's cabin for the holidays. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, a break from work, from stress, from everything. But that night, the road had other plans. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, thick and endless. I was the only car on the road, my high beams the only light cutting through the darkness. The radio had lost signal miles ago, leaving me alone with the sound of my tires crunching over the frozen highway. I should have stopped earlier, but I kept telling myself I could push through. Just another hour, maybe 2. Then I saw the headlights in my mirror. At first, I was relieved. Another driver, finally. But something felt off. The lights were too dim, too yellow, like they belonged to an old car. And they weren't approaching. They just hovered in the distance, following. I kept checking my mirror, but the car never got closer. Just 2 small, flickering lights trailing behind me through the storm. I don't know why, but the sight of them made my skin crawl. After a few miles, I passed a small roadside motel. The kind of place with a flickering neon shining in a vacancy. Sprayer's sign and a single office light glowing behind dusty curtains. I almost pulled in, but when I glanced in my mirror again, the headlights were gone. Just vanished. A cold chill wrapped around my spine. I told myself they must have turned off somewhere. Maybe I had imagined how strange they were, so I kept driving. The road stretched on, endless and empty. The snow was coming down heavier now, making it harder to see. I started watching my fuel gauge, my fingers tightening on the wheel. I should have stopped at that motel. Then my headlights hit something in the road, a shape, dark, still. My heart jumped into my throat. At first I thought it was an animal, a deer maybe. But as I got closer, I saw it was a person, a woman, standing dead center in the road. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. The car slid to a stop just a few feet from her. She didn't move. She was wearing a thin dress, completely wrong for the freezing temperature. Her bare feet were half buried in the snow. Her head was tilted down, long hair covering her face. I rolled down my window just an inch. The air outside was silent. "Ma'am?" I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. "Are you okay?" Nothing. I reached for my phone. No signal. I checked my mirror, and my breath caught in my throat. The headlights were back. But this time, they weren't behind me. They were right next to me. Just outside my driver's side window, no car attached. Just two hovering, flickering lights. I turned my head slowly. The woman was gone. My stomach flipped. I hit the gas, my tires spinning before finally gripping. I tore down the road, my pulse hammering in my ears. The lights followed. No matter how fast I drove, they stayed right beside me, keeping pace, never falling behind. And then, my engine died. The dashboard lights flickered, my headlights dimmed. The car coasted to a slow, painful stop, the silence swallowing me whole. I tried the key. Nothing. I tried my phone. No service. The snow fell harder. I sat there gripping the wheel, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Then something knocked on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned my head slowly. The woman was standing just outside my car. Her face was inches from the glass. Her eyes, if she even had eyes, were black holes, endless and empty. Her mouth was open too wide, like her jaw was broken, and her skin, God, her skin was stretched too thin, too pale, too wrong. She lifted one hand and pressed it against the glass. Her fingers were blue. And then she smiled. A horrible, stretched, unnatural smile. My chest clenched. My hands fumbled for the keys, twisting, turning, begging the car to start. Another knock. This time from the passenger side. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just focused on the keys, praying, whispering, my breath fogging up the window. Then the engine roared to life. I slammed the gas, my tires kicking up ice and snow as I launched forward. The figures didn't follow. The lights didn't follow. I drove. Fast. Reckless. Desperate. I didn't stop until I saw a gas station up ahead, its fluorescent lights glowing like a beacon. I pulled in hard, my tires skidding as I threw the car into park. My hands were shaking. My breath was ragged. The station was empty. Just a single cashier inside, leaning on the counter, watching the snow fall outside. I stumbled inside, the warm air making my skin prickle. The cashier looked up, a young guy, maybe 19, with dark circles under his eyes. "You okay?" he asked. I swallowed hard. There was a woman in the road. My car, it died. The kid's face went pale. "You took Old Ridge Road, didn't you?" My stomach dropped. He nodded like he already knew the answer. "People see her sometimes, when the snow's bad." I shook my head. "No, this was real. She knocked on my window. You're lucky," he cut in. "Most people don't make it back." A deep, sickening cold settled in my gut. I wanted to ask more, wanted to know who she was, what she was. But I didn't, because some things you're better off not knowing. I never drove that road again, and I never drive at night in the snow, because if I do, I might see her again, and next time, I don't think she'll let me go.
Story number 6.
I grew up hearing stories about the Devil's Pass, a lonely stretch of highway cutting through the Appalachian Mountains. People said it was cursed, that travelers who took it at night sometimes disappeared. I never believed those stories. Not until the night I drove that road myself. It was mid-December, and I was heading home to West Virginia from a work trip in Kentucky. My usual route was blocked by a snowstorm, and my GPS kept rerouting me through back roads. That's when I saw the suggestion, faster route available. It led me to Devil's Pass. I hesitated, remembering the stories my grandpa used to tell. But I was tired, the snow was picking up, and shaving an hour off my trip seemed worth it, so I took the turn. At first, it seemed like any other mountain road, narrow, winding, lined with dense trees. The snow piled high on the sides, untouched by tire tracks. I was the only car. The radio was all static, so I turned it off, listening to the hum of my engine and the rhythmic thumping of my tires against the cracked pavement. I kept my high beams on, cutting through the swirling snow. Then about 10 miles in, I saw something up ahead. A car, parked on the side of the road. An old sedan, half buried in the snow, its hazard lights flashing weakly. As I slowed down, my stomach twisted. There was something wrong about it. The driver's side door was wide open. The engine was still running, but no one was inside. I pulled up beside it, rolling down my window just a crack. The interior was coated in frost, like it had been sitting there for hours. Then I noticed the footprints, a single set leading away from the car and into the trees. I don't know why, but I turned off my engine. The silence was deafening. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I sat there staring at those tracks. They didn't make sense. The person had walked away from the car, but there were no tracks leading back. No sign of struggle, just a clean, straight path into the woods. Then I heard it, a whisper, faint. Right outside my window, my blood ran cold. I flicked my eyes to the mirror, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. The trees were too still, the snow too quiet. Then, thump! Something hit my trunk. Hard. I jumped, my breath catching. My headlights flickered. Slowly, I turned my head to look in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, a shadowy figure, standing just behind my car. But the moment I blinked, it was gone. I slammed my door lock. My fingers fumbled for the key. That's when I saw them. More footprints. But these weren't leading away from the car. They were coming toward me. The snow shifted. I swear to God, I saw movement. Something crawling, slithering just beneath the surface like the ground itself was alive. My headlights flickered again. The radio popped with static. Then, through the blizzard, I saw a figure step onto the road. A man, tall, thin. His clothes were soaked, torn like he'd been walking for days. His face, God, his face was twisted, stretched too wide like his skin didn't fit right. He stood there, staring at me. Then he smiled. I didn't think. I turned the key, slamming my foot on the gas. The tires skidded. The car lurched forward. I swerved around the abandoned sedan, my heart hammering as I sped down the road. My rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. But I knew. He was still there, watching. The road twisted, my headlights struggling to keep up. The snow blurred everything. I kept my eyes forward, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Then the whispers came back. Not outside this time. Inside. Right behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't. The temperature in my car plummeted. My breath fogged up the windshield. The radio crackled, and through the static I heard it. Shh! You shouldn't have come. I slammed the volume down, my pulse a drum in my ears. My body screamed at me to look in the mirror, but I fought it. I knew if I did, I wouldn't be driving alone anymore. Then up ahead, lights. A gas station. The sight hit me like a lifeline. I pressed the gas harder, the engine roaring as I raced toward it. The moment I pulled into the lot, the whispers stopped. The air warmed. I threw the car into park, my hands still shaking. The station was old, rundown, but open. A single attendant stood behind the counter, watching me through the window. I stepped inside, the bell jingling above my head. The heat hit me in a wave, but I was still cold. Frozen. The man behind the counter was ancient, deep wrinkles, tired eyes. He looked me up and down, then said, "You took the pass, didn't you?" I swallowed. Yeah. Did you stop?" he cut. I hesitated. His expression darkened. "You stopped, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. He sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "They always get one every winter." I stared at him. "Who?" He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. You got lucky." My mouth was dry. "The car on the road, the one with the open door." "Forget it," he said quickly. "Forget you saw it." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The fluorescent lights above us flickered. I suddenly felt watched. The attendant grabbed a pen, scribbling something on a piece of paper. He slid it across the counter. "Take this route back to the highway. Don't take any turns. Don't stop for anyone. If you hear something behind you, keep driving." My stomach twisted. What if? He just shook his head. "Drive fast." I left without another word. When I got back to my car, I didn't check my mirror. I checked my back seat. I just drove. I followed his directions, never veering from the path. The road was still dark, still twisting, but I felt it. The weight was lifting. The whispers never came back. By the time I reached the highway, I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't stop driving until I reached my sister's house, long past sunrise. I never found Devil's Pass on a map again. The GPS never rerouted me that way. But sometimes when I drive alone at night, I see something in the distance. Two flickering headlights, trailing behind me, waiting.
Story number 7.
I've always loved winter road trips. Something about the empty highways, the way the snow covers the world in silence. It's peaceful. At least, it used to be. That changed last December. I was driving home from Montana, cutting through the Dakotas, heading back to my family in Wisconsin. The forecast predicted heavy snow, but I thought I could beat it. I was wrong. By the time I hit the back roads, the storm had swallowed everything. My headlights barely cut through the whiteout, and the road signs were buried under drifts of snow. The GPS signal was spotty, and the last town I passed was miles behind me. I was completely alone. Or so I thought. About an hour into the storm, I spotted something in the distance. A car, parked on the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing weakly through the snow. As I got closer, my stomach twisted. The driver's side door was open. Nobody was inside. I slowed down, debating whether to stop. Maybe someone had walked to find help, but in this storm, that would be suicide. Then I saw them. Footprints, leading away from the car, and they didn't just go into the woods, they circled the car, over and over like someone had been pacing or waiting. A heavy unease settled in my chest. Something wasn't right. I checked my phone, still no signal. I decided to keep driving. If someone needed help, they'd already be gone. I passed the abandoned car and pushed forward, the snow growing thicker, the world quieter. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, expecting to see something, someone, standing next to that car. But there was nothing. At least, not yet. 15 minutes later, my headlights caught movement on the side of the road. A shape, barely visible through the snow. A person. I hit the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. The figure stood just at the edge of the tree line, facing away from me. I hesitated. They weren't waving for help. They weren't moving at all, just standing, staring into the trees. I rolled down my window an inch. "Hey, you okay?" No answer. The figure didn't turn, didn't react. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. They weren't wearing a coat or shoes. Their clothes were thin, tattered, not suited for this weather. Their hair was long, tangled, their arms hanging limply at their sides. I should have driven away. I should have ignored them. But instead, I reached for my phone to call for help, even though I knew there was no signal. When I looked up, they were gone. Just vanished. No footprints leading into the trees. No sign they had ever been there. I stared at the spot where they had stood, my pulse hammering in my ears, the hairs on my arms lifted. Then I heard it. A soft tapping, coming from the back window of my car. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I threw the car into drive and floored it. My tires spun for half a second before catching traction, and then I was tearing down the icy road, breath shallow, heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop. Not when I saw more shapes appearing on the sides of the road. Not when the whispers started. Not when my radio, previously dead, suddenly crackled to life, playing an old static-filled song that I know I'd heard before but couldn't remember from where. I just kept driving. I don't know how long I was on that road. It felt endless. But then, suddenly, a gas station. I nearly skidded off the road, pulling into the lot. The place was ancient, its neon sign buzzing weakly in the storm. An old pickup truck sat near the pumps, its windows frosted over. I parked and ran inside, the bell above the door jingling violently as I entered. The warmth hit me like a wave, but I still felt frozen. A man stood behind the counter, watching me with tired eyes. He looked about 60, dressed in a thick flannel, a coffee cup steaming in his hand. "You saw them, didn't you?" he said. I stopped dead. My throat was dry. "Saw who?" he sighed, setting his coffee down. "They always come out when it snows." My skin crawled. I glanced around the store. It was empty, the fluorescent lights humming softly. "Who are they?" I asked. The man shook his head. "No one knows, but people see them. Travelers. Just like you." I swallowed hard. "What happens if you stop for them?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me for a long moment, as if deciding whether to tell me the truth. Then he said quietly, "No one who does ever comes back." A cold, sick feeling settled in my stomach. I looked outside. The storm had lessened, but the road was still coated in white. My car sat alone under the flickering station lights. But something felt off. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. The man behind the counter spoke again, his voice softer now. "You should get going." I nodded. I didn't argue. I bought a coffee I didn't need just for an excuse to stay inside a few minutes longer, but eventually I forced myself to leave. The cold hit me like a slap, the wind howling. I got into my car, locking the doors immediately. I checked my mirrors. The road was empty. The figures were gone. I drove as fast as I could. Eventually, I found the highway again. The storm passed. The night lightened. When I finally got home, I told my family I had hit bad weather. That was all. I didn't mention the figures, the whispers, the tapping, but I know what I saw. And I know, deep down, they're still out there, waiting for the next traveler to take the wrong road, waiting for someone to stop.
Story number 8.
I don't drive at night anymore. Not after what happened last winter. I was heading home from visiting my parents in northern Maine, making the long drive back to Vermont. The snow had started falling around dusk, and by the time I hit the back roads, it was coming down heavy. The highway would have been safer, but I wanted to shave off an hour, so I took a detour through the mountains. Big mistake. The road was empty. No other cars, no houses, just endless, snow-covered trees stretching on for miles. The only sound was my tires crunching over the frozen pavement and the occasional gust of wind rattling my car. Then my GPS glitched. The map froze for a few seconds before the screen went black. No service. I figured I'd keep driving straight until I saw a sign, but then my headlights caught something up ahead. A man standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my car skidding on the ice before stopping just feet away from him. He didn't move. I sat there, my heart hammering. He was tall, wrapped in a dark coat with a hood pulled over his head. His hands hung at his sides, fingers curled slightly. I rolled my window down just an inch. "Hey, you okay?" No answer. Snow swirled around him, clinging to his clothes. He was barefoot, my stomach twisted. Something about him felt wrong. I turned my high beams on. That's when I saw his face, or rather, the lack of one. Where his eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over bone. I gasped, slamming my foot on the gas. My tires spun, the car fishtailing before lurching forward. As I passed him, my headlights cast his shadow long across the snow. I didn't look back. I kept driving, faster than I should have in the snow, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My pulse was a drum in my ears. Then I saw another one, standing on the side of the road, same dark coat, same blank, featureless face. I barely had time to react before more appeared. First one, then two, then five, lining the road like silent sentries. All of them facing my car, their heads tilting slightly as if they were watching me. I pressed harder on the gas. The figures blurred past, unmoving, untouched by the howling wind. Then my headlights flickered. The radio popped with static, and from the speakers a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I nearly lost control of the car. The headlights dimmed, then went out entirely. I was plunged into darkness. Panic clawed at my throat. I slammed the dashboard, trying to get the lights back on. The engine was still running, but the road was gone, swallowed by the night. Then, in the rearview mirror, a shape. Sitting in my back seat, I didn't see it move, didn't hear the door open, but it was there. Close enough that I should have felt its breath on my neck, if it had any breath at all. The air turned ice cold. I didn't think. I yanked the wheel to the right, the car spinning out, tires skidding over the ice. The world tilted, snow, sky, trees, a blur of white and black. Then, impact. A sharp, jarring crash as my car slammed into a snowbank. Silence. I was dizzy, my vision swimming. My head throbbed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then I remembered the thing in my back seat. I turned slowly. The seat was empty. But the door was open. The wind howled through it, snowflakes swirling into the car. I sat frozen, gripping the wheel, too afraid to move. Then I heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps. Coming closer, I fumbled for my phone. No signal. The battery was almost dead. The footsteps stopped, right outside my door. I didn't want to look, but I did. Through the frost-covered window, I saw a face staring back at me. Blank. Empty. Skin stretched too tight over a skull. I hit the lock button frantically, my frozen fingers barely functioning. Then it smiled. The skin where a mouth should have been ripped open into a jagged, unnatural grin. I screamed, slamming my foot on the gas, but the car was stuck. The tires spun uselessly. The figure leaned closer. A hand, long, bony, wrong, pressed against the glass. Then it tapped. Once, twice, like it was waiting for me to open the door. I squeezed my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no." Then, a horn blared. Headlights flooded my car with light. A truck. Plowing through the storm, barreling down the road behind me, I turned back to the window. The figure was gone. The truck screeched to a stop, the driver jumping out and running toward me. "Hey, you okay?" I nodded, shaking, barely able to process what had happened. Just the driver, a middle-aged man with a thick coat and a kind face, helped pull my car out of the snowbank. He kept glancing around like he expected something to appear from the darkness. When we got back on the road, he said, "You shouldn't be out here alone, especially at night." I swallowed hard. Why? He didn't answer at first. Then, after a long pause, he said, "This road, people see things." I didn't ask anything else. I just drove. By the time I reached the highway, the snow had stopped. The world felt normal again. But I know what I saw, and I know that whatever was out there, it's still waiting for the next traveler to drive that road alone, waiting for someone to stop.